Welcome back to Unleashed with Mark Morano on TNT. Well, joining us now is Donna Jackson of Project 21. She's the director of development there. She's testified before Congress. Um, she is I guess you would say, a conservative civil rights activist, for lack of a better phrase. Welcome to the program, Donna.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. Well, let's start out. I don't know if you saw this last couple of days, but the highest ranking female in the Biden in the Navy, Admiral Rachel Levine, in quotes, Rachel, said climate change is having a disproportionate effect on Black communities. And he gave a whole, I said he gave a whole speech about how climate change is going to harm African Americans the most. Couple questions. Is that true? And how concerned is the are African Americans in general are about climate change? Is that one of their top concerns? Is that something we need to address before the African Americans can prosper in America?
Okay, well, let me straighten her statement out and correct it. It's climate change policies that are the most harmful to minority communities. When you look at the fact that the number one concern of minority communities is home ownership, building industries, intellect, all of these things are actually defeated and destroyed by climate change policy. Everything that we have in terms of these climate change policies have one primary goal, and that is to create artificial scarcity so that people are not able to afford to buy a new home. They can't afford their cost of living expenses. They can't afford to take care of their children. One of the things that I say, climate change policies has created something in the Black community where instead of you being able to work Monday to Friday, you're working Monday to Wednesday, you're already broke and you're borrowing.
Yeah.
Climate change policies have decimated Black communities. And what I say is this, if it's the biggest exploitation game in history, because what you see happening is they're using climate change policies to exploit the Black community like they've done everything else. The only difference is a green tinge. Primary concerns in minority communities, as you know, is building strong families. It's having schools that are not failing. It's low crime. That's not the concern. What you have is elite white liberals creating an agenda for African Americans that they didn't ask for and telling us to fall in line and do it with their tool. They're prioritizing these green pathways and canopies over the real concerns of minority communities, and that is to increase wealth, which climate change policies make sure you don't have.
Wow. Well, then I think the Biden administration would argue that their implementation of things like diversity, equity, inclusion are what their solution is to help Black Americans. Is that the savior for Black Americans? Is DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion coming from the federal government? Sorry, I'm
You
having
know,
trouble keeping a straight face.
I
But
mean, it's difficult to comprehend their idea of diversity, equity, inclusion. What they've done is made sure that they had, you don't have school districts in Chicago, Baltimore, Milwaukee, all failing, where you have 0% of the kids performing at grade level if it's not intentionally. Okay. So what they do is create the problems for us, and then they claim to come around and do a carve out for one or two of us while the rest of the community is destroyed. Everything about climate change policies and what this administration has done is to make sure they exclude as many people as they can from the American dream. I have truck drivers that owned trucking companies. They didn't just own their own trucks, but they actually employed other truck drivers. They created jobs in the community. They created wealth. They were able to take care of their families And the Clean Air Act by the EPA actually put all 8 trucking company owners out of business.
Wow.
There are 0 Black trucking companies left in Los Angeles because of the EPA's climate change policy.
Wow.
This is the intended consequence. Every time you create a climate change policy and a regulation, what does it do? The impact on minority communities, minority businesses are 4 times greater than they are on everyone else. It favors large corporations, which minority-owned businesses don't fall into. So what it does is actually put those businesses out of business. When you go into a Black community, they don't own their own homes because thanks to climate change policies that actually make the cost of building homes more expensive. The regulations makes them more unaffordable. They don't own their own businesses because all the regulations directed at small businesses that actually create a bigger hardship on those businesses because they don't have the money. So they don't own their own homes. They don't own their own business. They don't own anything in their communities. Nothing in the community. And so when you look, of course, you're going to have more poverty. The way to the middle class is home ownership. That's how you're able to pull money out to be able to start a small business, to be able to put your kids through college. And that's the one thing that these climate change policies are making sure they deny minority communities. The cost of being able to own your own home, the cost of being able to create your own business. And that is not the unintended consequence, it's the intended consequence. There's a study done by the Philadelphia Federal Reserve, and they said that when you give minorities ownership of a private vehicle, the wealth gap actually decreases. So what's the big push now? Electric vehicles that
Right.
Black people can't afford because it's not a 1-for-1, it's a 1-for-none. So they're making sure that people don't have their own private cars so that they have more access to more income. And if you look at Henry Ford, look, what did Henry Ford do? He made the Model T affordable to everyone, which ends up creating the suburb. It created the hospitality industry, and what we're seeing happening now is the reverse, because you have a vehicle that people are already priced out of, and now you're taking away their ability to make a living. And that's very important if you're trying to help a community. But they're not trying to help us. They're trying to harm us, and then they make their money off of saying that they're helping us.
All right, let me push back on you there. You say it created the suburbs, it created the hospitality industry. The suburbs have been declared racist by Biden's Pete Buttigieg as Secretary of Transportation. Highways have been declared racist, and the hospitality industry is destroying the earth with all the travel on climate change. So I guess what I'm saying is their ideology basically says everything you sort of were saying were good things. They're saying, no, we can't have that in this new great reset, climate, net zero world because all the things we created were bad and we're trying to undo it. Is that a fair assessment? And what does this bode for African Americans today as they continue to dismantle this? And are highways racist and are suburbs racist?
Okay, first of all, highways are not racist. Let's remember that when they made those highways, there were also white towns that didn't have an off-ramp either. This is what businesses always, when they do a SWOT analysis and they look at the opportunity and the threat, they're always looking at what is going to happen to my business in the long run. So they're not racist. The second thing is this. Everything the Biden administration is doing with these climate change policies is to diminish the standard of living and the quality of life for individuals. If you do that, you don't have zero population growth. You have negative population growth. That's what they want. And that's why they don't want people to have peace of mind, is what you get from vacations. And you also actually explore and realize, you know what? You and I are more alike than we thought we were. The second thing is when you don't have enough space, then people, it takes a mental toll on individuals. I mean, they call it smart cities, where they want to put everybody in these highly dense areas where they're all living in generational housing on top of each other. I call them open air prisons because the effect is the same. When people don't have enough space, then they become more aggressive. They become more mentally challenged. And then you have some of the situations you have right now. So that's what they're creating. You know, it's a funny thing, but they did a study, and it was actually in in a couple of California areas where they created a map for these cities where they wanted everybody to be in these highly dense areas. And that, if you took that map and put it on top of redlining, it was exactly the same.
Wow. So
Exactly the same. You know, they call it the Green New Deal. I call it the Green Jim Crow. I don't say they're racist, but if they did anything different, if they were, they wouldn't have to do a single thing different. Everything that they're doing right now is about creating unaffordability. And when you create unaffordability, you create poverty. That's why we have a shrinking middle class. And they were so good at this experiment with African Americans that now they're trying to unleash it on the entire population. It's always affordability that increases the quality of life. The Model T was created 50 years after the automobile, but the Model T was available to every man. The other cars prior to that were only available to the rich. And
kind of
what
like
did you
EVs.
have? Yes. And what did you have? People like the Marriotts, who started off with a stand on the side of the road, that built the largest hoteler in the world. And this kind of creativity is available to everybody when people are able to unleash their talents.
Wow. I went to George Mason University, and one of my professors was Walter Williams, the economist. And I remember him drilling into students and also in his books explaining, that African Americans had the most intact families, with, I think, the highest teenage employment up until desegregation in the 1950s. And then he talked about the effects of the Great Society on African American communities. Can you just sort of lay out what happened to African Americans, say, in the 1960s with Lyndon Johnson's Great Society? Because it was all done in the name, obviously, the Civil Rights Act. It was all done in the name, particularly the Great Society, to help African Americans. Did it help them, and what were the impacts of that historically?
Well, it was the exact opposite of that. You know, there was two professors that sat down and decided that we could help more African Americans if we didn't have intact families. So what they came up with is that we split the families and then we can feed twice as many people, or we can help twice as many people. You know, when the government says they're here to help, you should say no. And so what happened is when you destroyed the two-parent households, what you destroyed the community. Because what you have in a lot of what you're seeing in terms of crime, in terms of high school rates, in terms of the poverty, is because there's not two-parent households. And on a humanistic basis, think of it this way. I'm a child, and the person who's supposed to love me the most, that looks like me, is no longer in my life. So I have anger, and I don't care about myself. So I'm not going to care about anyone else. And so what you see happening is these people these kids that are crying out for help because they don't feel loved. You have gang members that can capitalize on that. All of this is because the government measures the success of a poverty program based not upon how many people we get out of poverty, but how many people you service. So the motivation is to serve more, to create more poverty so that it can be more successful. That's the wrong direction to go, because we now have 3 generations of fatherless kids because we vilified the men in the community and said they're the problem. And so now you have 70% of Black households run by a single parent. But wait, it's coming to a neighborhood near you, because why do you think they're now talking about toxic masculinity? Why is it that every time you look in a newspaper, if something happened, if it's a shooter, if it's a white straight male, it's front page, because they're coming after your community since they've already figured out they can ruin ours. There's 2 ways that you build the government: war and the poor. And both of them are equally as lucrative for a lot of people. And so you have this military industrial complex that you need a war or conflict to be able to keep the money flowing. Poverty complex, just as lucrative. 85% of all the resources allocated for any poverty program goes to not the community. It goes to the administrators, NGOs, all of these people that have nothing to do with actually feeding or helping the people in the community. So that's why you see this steady flow of every time you turn around, there's another program. I say we have too many programs, and the best thing that minority communities can say is no to those programs, because they all come with contingencies that limit the assets that you can have. They say will help you in the long run, in the long run, as long as you never do anything to help yourself. So they force you. If you take any of that money, you are not allowed to invest. You are not allowed to save. You are not allowed to own any personal property. In fact, the asset limit, believe it or not, for a family, $3,000. And that includes your car, furniture, jewelry, cash on hand. So they make sure that you're never able to get out of poverty once you're in there.
Wow. All right. We have to take a break. When we come back, I want to ask you about why African Americans have traditionally voted overwhelmingly for the Democratic Party and why that may be changing. And also why Joe Biden says you ain't black if you support Trump. So we'll ask you all that when we come back. We're talking with Donna Jackson, Project 21, Director of Membership Development. This is Unleashed with Mark Morano on TNT. We'll be right back after these messages.